All right. Good morning. Sounds nice. So I have, I guess, a couple favors, possibly. Who's the designer? Designers? Yeah. Developers? All right. So I'd like everybody to stand up, if you don't mind. Yeah. It's after lunch. I got to move around a little bit. We're not going to do that because that's weird. But so if you're a designer, go to that side of the room. Oh, just kidding. Don't do that. That would be chaos. But yeah, so I have a wife and a kid. Kid's 16. She's digging around with the web, poking around, learning HTML and CSS and some SASS stuff. So they couldn't make it. She had tennis stuff, and I decided to let her be responsible and actually finish out her tennis season instead of coming hang out at web conferences with me in New York all week. So yeah, she's doing that. But if Verity could reach out and act like you're giving me a hug, that would be awesome. Yeah. Twiddle the mustache, you can do that too. All right, one. Oop, let me go back. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, very cool. All right. So second favor, if you don't mind, that was almost kind of like a little sly ploy to see who would close their laptops. Because it's always weird to especially in a theater like this, where it's very well lit, and I can see all your faces, but I can't see eyeballs. I see glowing apples, and one IBM somewhere over there. So if you don't have work to do, if you don't mind, if you could shut your laptop. I don't care if you tweet about me. I have no ego to stroke. It doesn't bother me one bit. And we'll talk about some SASS stuff. Because I want this to be kind of conversational, because we're going to talk a little bit about bridging the gap between designers and developers. So it seems like we have kind of a developer heavy, but a good chunk of designers, which is going to be pretty cool. So my name is Bermon. I have a mustache and recently a beard. This grew overnight for the most part. But I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. And I love the city. It's fantastic. New York is also pretty darn fancy. It's about 100 times bigger than Charlotte, I think. So it's pretty huge. First time in New York. I dig it. I like it. It's pretty nice. Lots of amazing food. I love food. But in Charlotte, I work for Cardinal Solutions. They're a consultancy. And I run the UX group in North Carolina. So I kind of live in this weird hybrid role where I'm doing a lot of UX stuff. And my background is print design, and I've been doing interaction design and UI design for the last 10 or so years. And I also picked up web things many years ago. Anybody ever play StarCraft or Diablo 2? Yeah. So back in the late 90s, Diablo was a thing and StarCraft was a thing. And I was a little gangly, tall, pasty white teenager. Not much different than I am now, with a bit more facial hair. That's about the only difference. And I joined an online gaming guild. I think me and a friend were hanging out in BattleNet one day, and a guy by the name of Sir Sheckland, who was the king of the gaming guild, said, "Hey, come join the guild. You can play with our guildmates, and we'll play big game hunter maps and just hang out and do geeky things online." So I joined the guild, and it just so happened that the guild had a website. Now I've been doing print stuff now for a few years, and the web was just kind of new. I think I had just gotten the internet, and I'm from Alabama, so yeah, roll tide. Yeah, awesome. So from Alabama, and well, we'll see who wins this year.
I won't talk about it.
I know. So in Alabama, it's a little bit behind the times. And I think in 1998-ish, we had internet, which was pretty magical way back then. But it was a one-way cable. So basically you had to dial in to get the internet. But you had cable for download speeds. But for sending, it went through dial-up. It was super weird. And we were doing the beta testing stuff. So I joined the guild. They had a website. And everything was on GeoCities and Tripod. Some of that stuff still exists, except for the GeoCities stuff, because it all kind of went away. It's somewhere like Wayback Machine somewhere. But I had a copy of Dreamweaver, which may or may not have been purchased. And I started tinkering around with really crappy tables, and because I was doing a lot of print stuff and tinkering in Photoshop, I think it was like Photoshop 4, and then they've gone like full circle and like beyond now, which is kind of weird. But making like animated GIFs and doing really weird things in Flash because that was kind of getting big, and it was a lot of fun. CSS, I had no idea what it was way back then, and eventually things progressed, and I moved on and started learning more, picking up exactly what CSS was. I think the first thing I learned in CSS was how to not underline links, which is probably the worst idea ever. But I learned how to create a CSS rule that was like class, no underline, and I use it everywhere. Now I would never do that, I don't think. But it would be more efficient now, I think. So in Charlotte, I've been there now for about 7 years. I run a front-end developer meetup group. We talk about SASS a fair amount and general front-end things. I also run the user experience group there. About a month ago, I put on a conference called Blend Conference. That was a blast. It was a lot of fun. We had about 50 some odd speakers and 3 tracks doing UX, visual design, development. And yeah, it was a blast. We'll do it next year. If you want to come, let me know. And I love cupcakes. So somebody kindly pointed out earlier this week that there's a place called Crumbs that have like these gargantuous cupcakes. They're amazing. I bought 4 and they're all gone. So yeah, those are good. I also love root beer. It's pretty tasty. And if I can mix the two together, it's even better. In Madison, Wisconsin, they sell root beer float cupcakes. The best thing you'll ever put in your mouth. They're so good. I love them. So on Twitter, I'm Bermon Painter, but your laptops are closed, so you can like ignore that right now. For later on, we can chat about SASS or root beer or Diablo if you want to. That'd be great. So this is what we're going to focus on today. So in the work that I do, I work with lots of different people. I don't work with just designers or just developers. The team that we have in Charlotte is fairly cross-discipline for the most part. We have to work together. We're a consultancy. We jump on and off various projects from .NET to SharePoint to some PHP stuff, soon some more Ruby things since I'm there, and I've been there 5 months. So we're trying to push things along into a bit more modern technologies, a little bit of Node, some fun stuff with Grunt, and I need for my team to understand various bits and pieces of what we're working with so we can all work together and collaborate. So this is what we're going to talk about today, and I want to make it kind of collaborative. So, in the beginning I asked if you're a designer or developer, and that's kind of good to know. It's very general because nowadays there's like a UX designer and an information architect, interaction designer, there's like a UX developer, there's a product manager, there's still web designers. I ran across a guy that was still called a webmaster, which was kind of cool. I had a webmaster title years and years ago, and then I saw Lord of War. So I wanted to be called Master of Web. Yeah, that never happened. So there are a lot of misconceptions about what designers are or who developers are, and I want you to shout some of them at me. When you think of a designer, what do you think about? What comes to mind? Photoshop, yeah. Lots of Photoshop. What's that?
Pixel anal, yeah.
Pixel anal, yes. Very much so. There's a lot of pixel pushing going on. Making things pretty. I hate that. Yeah, I hear that a lot. What's that?
Fixed canvas.
Fixed canvas. Yeah, that happens. Sorry?
Make things work.
Make things work, yeah. Anybody else? Dribble. Yeah, dribble. I love dribble. It's awesome. Yeah, so they're typically right-brained. They're the intuitive, creative people that do really fun stuff. They're kind of trendy. They can be somewhat hipster. They're afraid of the command line. I'm not quite sure why, but they are, so some people say. And their sole existence is to make things pretty. So let's talk about developers. So when you think of a developer, what do you think of?
Awesome.
Yeah. So we have awesome. What else do we have? Stinky. Sometimes that is very true. Antisocial. Lazy.
Angry.
I prefer efficient, but yeah, angry. What's that? Mustache, facial hair, all that good stuff. So, they're like the left brain folks They're linear thinkers most of the time. They can be fairly technical. They're bearded, yeah. So I'm like mustached and bearded. Not wearing plaid today, so I think I'm doing a little bit better. They're incapable of using Photoshop. And their sole existence is to make things function. And none of that is true. Some of it kind of is, but mostly not. So the reason I bring that up is to talk about how teams typically work. Because there are these stereotypes of who is a developer, who is a designer, and I'm going to avoid like all the other 20 or 30 different ways we can call each other. I like awesome. Awesome is good. We can call each other awesome. But this is a typical process where you have these very siloed sections where things happen. So there's design. They're the ones that make things pretty. Eventually, they finish up their design, and they pass it along to the front-end developers. The front-end developers take the design, they slice it up. They craft this exquisite semantic markup. It is glorious. And then they hand that off to a back-end developer. They tie that into their system. Sometimes they may work together. They may be the same person. And then somewhere down the line, they kind of ship. That was kind of how things worked years and years and years ago. And maybe if you're in a smaller shop, they may work that way now. Now, I work in enterprise. Who works in like enterprise-y, soul-sucking work? Yeah, it's not really that bad, really. It can be if you let it. So I've been doing enterprise software for the last 3 or 4 years. I work for a large bank in Charlotte and a large publishing company. And anybody like NASCAR? This is New York. It may not be that big up here. Nobody likes NASCAR? Not even from Alabama? No? Nothing? So I worked for a NASCAR company for a while, Hendrick Motorsports, if you know who they are, which was interesting, a large company. And right now I work for Cardinal, which is, we do a lot of work for Fortune 50 and 500 companies, which is interesting, to say the least. But this is the typical process that happens when you get into a large enterprise. Somewhere off the screen that you normally don't see is somebody in a suit going, hey, I want this thing. And then they dedicate money to it, and something happens, and teams form, and you're allocated the funds and equipment and time to do whatever you need to be doing. Somebody writes content somewhere, if you're lucky, and that gets passed along to the UX folks. Sometimes they may be UX and information architects. That information, typically, that they create wireframes in enterprise. That's kind of what they do. Some poor soul stuck in a queue doing wireframes all day, every day. So they do the wireframes. They pass that along to the designer. The designer's role typically is to just make it pretty, which is kind of unfortunate because they're really good problem solvers. So they take these very detailed and commented wireframes, and in essence, they're painting over them in Photoshop to add on some type of an aesthetic. That design, again, goes to the front-end developer who, depending on what system they're using in enterprise, they attempt to make nice semantic markup. A lot of times it doesn't happen. And then that goes on to the back-end developers somewhere in some magical black box where things happen, and a month or 2 or 12 down the road, something launches somewhere, and you never really know if it was successful or not. There really aren't any metrics around some of the information. If there is, you don't get it. That's my experience with some enterprise. It's not all that way, though. But that's typically what happens. And the problem with these types of processes is that they create silos. They don't create an atmosphere or a culture where people can work together. Most enterprises are heavy waterfall, and if they try and do agile, but it's like this weird agile waterfall mix, where it's just like waterfalls, but they're just much shorter. And the information never goes back upstream. Everything comes down. So when I worked for a bank in Charlotte that I won't name, so they were pretty fun, but it was weird. I was a developer there, and we were like way downstream. So we would get all this documentation, like 60-page spec docs that we would never read, and we had to make the stuff. And eventually it happened somewhere. And those type of atmospheres, what they create is this kind of a checkbox mentality, where you're in your silo, you have this list of things that you need to accomplish, so you check it off, and you're kind of done. You move on, you don't collaborate, you don't talk, and it's kind of sad. I know, it's so horrible. It's not really that bad. Only sometimes, depending on where you work. So as people that work on the web, I really think that we have one job or one role, and that role is to ship software. That's what we do. We're making something for somebody else to use. So as a team, regardless of who we are and what we do, that's what we do. We ship things. We make things for somebody else to use. Sometimes it could be an external client, an internal client, some users somewhere. It could be for ourselves. But we ship things. That's what we do. So instead of designer or developer, I want to talk about being designers and developers. Not unlike this weird hybrid thing that's been going around the last 6 months or so, but two different roles that are working together to make really awesome stuff. And sometimes it kind of feels a little bit like this, where you're trying to get a designer and a developer to work together and do some really fun stuff, and it's just really hard. But when you get them to do it, it's so gratifying. It makes me happy. I love Adventure Time. It's the best. So there's a guy by the name of Edward Deci. I really dig his studies. He's not dead, which is really cool. He's actually not too far from here. He's somewhere like in New York, I think. But he's a behavioral psychologist that does lots of studies on how we interact as human beings and the various things that motivate us. So he has a quote that I like, and he says that human beings have an inert tendency to seek out novelty and challenges, to extend and exercise their capabilities, to explore and to learn. So in essence, that's kind of how I feel what human beings are, kind of what we do. We don't want to sit in a cube and just do this one thing and check on a checkbox. We want to make things. We want to solve problems. We want to be challenged so we can explore and we can learn and we can grow and we can affect other people's lives. So he has a lot of studies that I'm not going to go into, but they're very, very cool if you get a chance to read them. Check them out on like Wikipedia. There's a lot of books and things you can read. But he has a theory that he co-authored with somebody else called the self-determination theory. So basically, it's that human nature requires three principles to function and to grow. And this is what he says. One, we want to feel like we're being competent. We want to feel like we're achieving some type of mastery, that we're improving, that we're growing. And what he's found in his studies is that human beings, we want to learn, we want to grow. We want to have these opportunities to make really cool things. Two is relatedness. So we're all here at a conference, which is pretty cool. The very first SASS Conf. This is possible because we can relate. We all have a technology that we enjoy using, and we support that technology. We try and use it every day, I hope. But we have this tendency to surround ourselves and connect with other people. There's been a lot of that going on in New York. Brooklyn Beta was yesterday and the day before and the day before that. And there were like 1,300 people that kind of swarmed Brooklyn to get together, talk, chat, make new friends. We need to fill those relationships. And the third thing is autonomy. So I don't know about y'all, but I hate somebody telling me what to do or how to do things or when to do things. I wasn't a very good student in college because of that. I think I went for 5 years and dropped out because I was already making good money and they were telling me what to do and that I had to be in class, even though I was passing tests, but not showing up. So they like docked me points for not going to class, which was super bummer. But I like feeling like I'm in control of my own life. I like in my personal life, in my work life, whenever it is, I like to feel like I'm in harmony with myself and I can make my own decisions. And I think human beings in general like to feel that way. We don't like to feel controlled. So at Cardinal, we're doing some interesting things. You know, again, I'm new there. I've been there 5 or 6 months. And it's a brand new team in North Carolina. We have about 20 or so user experience designers up in Cincinnati, Ohio. Charlotte, we have 2 so far. We're trying to hire 4 or 5 more folks before the end of the year, and another 10 or so next year to grow our practice in the Carolinas. Now, they've given me a lot of rope to kind of experiment and see what works with our team. So in Charlotte, we have 90 plus people across the various practices that we have. Ours is the smallest, but not for long. So these are some of the things that we're trying to do with our teams to work together. not be siloed, and to be more productive in the work that we do. So the first thing we're trying to do is we're trying to create agile teams or fluid teams. This is like, it really should be agile with a little a. I'm not very big on methodologies like Agile or Scrum, or I kind of like Kanban or Waterfall. So this is more of a methodology agnostic way to approach things, just making sure that the teams are agnostic enough, or they have enough flexibility to change, depending on the project that they're on, the size of the team, and they're not shoehorned into this specific methodology. The second thing is we're giving folks autonomy. If you work in enterprise, there's not really a lot of autonomy. There are a lot of politics, but not a lot of autonomy. So there's a really good quote I like from Tom Kelly from IDEO, and he says the ultimate freedom for creative groups is the freedom to experiment with new ones, new ideas. Some skeptics insist that innovation is expensive. In the long run, innovation is cheap. Mediocrity is expensive, and autonomy can be the antidote. So Cardinal's actually really good with providing folks in the company a lot of autonomy to do really nifty things. We have hack sessions where we get to make really fun stuff. We had a hack session not too long ago where somebody had hacked a Connect and dug into their API and created like a weird, like really spooky teddy bear that would like follow and interact with you through the Connect. Kind of spooky, but it won us a job with a company that basically all the people in the company had they had work gloves on. They were working with heavy machinery, but they needed to be able to interact with their systems. So we created basically like a Minority Report type-ish system where we could hack the Connect, tie that into the computer, and folks could interact with the system even with their gloves on just by swiping around, which is pretty cool. So that happened because they gave folks the autonomy to make a really creepy teddy bear that follows you around. But it's really cool that we get to do things like that. The third thing is that we're experimenting with this idea of concurrent creation. So in typical waterfall, there are these silos, and people create things in their silos. Instead, we're trying to create things in tandem. So we have our UX and our visual designers and our developers kind of working together in various bits and pieces, and I'll get into more detail on that one here in a second. And then we're trying to provide people opportunities for mastery. Now, I define mastery as deliberate practice plus time plus repetition. It's something that you have to dedicate in order to master something. So hierarchy-wise, we're trying to keep things fairly flat, at least in our UX department, because I don't want to manage people, and I like to make things. And you can't do that if you're a manager most of the time. So we're trying to look for opportunities for folks to have mastery. So the way we do that is the only hierarchy we really have, if you want to even call it that, is we have members of the team that have skills they want to improve on, and other members of the team that have those skills. So we try and pair them up so they can work together to improve mastery across the board. So if I was going to take that silly linear process and readjust it just a little bit, this is kind of the way that I would do it. So I would have the different teams or practices kind of hovering around this single goal, which is to ship something that's useful for somebody to use. But I'm not going to go into all that. That's like a different talk. I'm going to focus on these two pieces because that's why you're here. And these are the pieces that really tie in with SASS. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that we're doing with SASS that I can talk about. Since it is enterprise, they're like weird NDAs, and I can't really show all. I'm going to do it anyway because it's not being recorded, and it's not going to get out after the conference. So if I show slides of anything, don't take pictures, I could get in trouble. Not really, maybe, who knows. So there are two things with this process that we're trying to do that I hope make us effective. Again, we're experimenting. The first one is that we want to get to an end product with as little waste as possible. So in enterprise, it's really hard to do because people's jobs typically depend on them sitting in a cube and creating 60 wireframes or 60 Photoshop comps or really hard to understand code that only they can maintain. It's nice job security, but we don't want to do that because it's not really fun, and you don't last long. So we want to get from this idea to a real thing as quickly as we can without wasting a lot of time. The second one is, in order for us to do that, there are things that we have to do. We have to muck around in Photoshop some and do some sketching and wireframing, but we only want to create what's absolutely necessary. so we can either validate or invalidate design decisions or business decisions. So that's what we're trying to focus on for the most part. So you'll probably hear a lot about these things the rest of the conference, especially tomorrow in the workshop days. So this is going to be very code light or no code at all to share the concepts, because I think 3 or 4 other folks are actually talking in detail about how these tie in with SASS, with code samples and lots of really fun things. But the first thing is style tiles. Samantha Warren coined this, came up with the idea. I totally dig it. So where are my designers at? Yeah. All right, so designers, how often have you been working with a client and you do a Photoshop comp, a really nice Photoshop comp, or maybe 3 or 4. You go to the client, you present something pretty, and did they ever just choose that one design? No, silly clients. Why can't they cooperate? People are weird. They don't do what you want them to do. So instead they'll go like, I like that logo, and I like that texture, and I like that thing over there, and another thing over there. So your job as a designer is to take these 3 or 4 or 10 different Photoshop comps that weren't designed to fit together and try and make them fit. So Samantha calls that a Franken-comp, which is, exactly the way it sounds. So her solution to that is to create this idea of a style tile, to hit on the high-level aesthetics of a design. And they look kind of like this. These are a few examples where you're taking logos and some icons, some colors, various font treatments, color treatments, some word marks, how paragraphs and links may look. And you're using that as kind of a baseline so you can start conversations with your client to figure out what the aesthetic really should be, what kind of design language they really need. Here's another one. Again, they're all about the same. And again, you're hitting on the high points, only the things that are really important to get a feel of the overall aesthetic. Here's another one. Now, this is one Samantha Warren did for something that I can't read because I have crappy eyesight. But what she typically does is she'll create a handful of these that have very different aesthetics. And that gives her a really nice conversation starter with her clients. She can talk to them and see what they like. Do they like these colors? Do they like that logo treatment? What do they like? So she can adjust that, combine those, and she uses that to create the site. Now, the really nice things about most of these style tiles is they're pretty darn simple. And you can do all of these with SASS and HTML. So Sparkbox, you can actually go to their website. They're doing this design live kind of deal, where they're designing in the open, and you can see their progress. So they're super serious about building the right web, I guess. But this is all HTML, and they totally dig it. And they even go to the depth of making everything responsive, which I'm not going to show because keynote animation is not fun. But that's basically what you get. So what you can do is you can take all of your nice little CSS or SASS stuff, and you can translate that to a style tile. So when it comes time to build the real application or real website, you can transition over your colors that were chosen, your textures, your fonts, into whatever your SASS would be. So style tiles are really nice and fairly simple. You can knock out a handful of style tiles in a few hours. And if for the designers in here, if you can't code, if you're not too savvy yet in HTML or CSS, it's a really good opportunity to pair up with a developer. It's a great learning opportunity, and it's some shared sharing where you can teach them some design principles, they can teach you some basic code, and you can go in and tweak and edit. And they could too if they really wanted to, because I think anybody can learn design principles, anybody can learn how to code. I don't think I will ever be a really fantastic developer. I will never be a back-end developer because my brain doesn't really work that way. But I know enough to make things explode, which is good and bad sometimes. Now, the next thing that we try and work with is this idea of element collages. Now, these are a bit more in-depth, and I kind of like these a little bit more than style tiles. They're kind of the same thing, but kind of not. But they go a bit more in depth. Now, this is one that Dan Mall does. So he basically just opens up Photoshop and just goes to town. He doesn't worry about widths or responsive stuff. He's just solely working on trying to get an aesthetic down. This is another one that almost looks like a style tile. You're outlining colors, some color treatments, some iconography, how your buttons look, how some of your text and lists look. Super simple to do. That'd probably take like an hour and a half or so to do in SASS. Super simple, maybe less if you're really good. Now this is another example of just a really, really dirt simple Photoshop exercise where you're just placing various elements on the screen to see what works and what doesn't work. So when you do convert this to code somewhere down the line, or if you're doing it in code, just making sure that everything jives together well. Now, style guides is kind of like the best thing ever. I love style guides. At this point, you should typically have a pretty refined aesthetic. You should know how things are going to look visually. You should have a pretty good idea how things should be built structurally. In our case, we're working on an internal style guide system that we can use everywhere. Most of our clients don't write front end, or they do, but it's not very good. So it's kind of a dual thing for us where it allows us to get to market quicker. Allows us to also use it as a training tool for them to teach them how front end should be done. And we sneak in some SASS in there. So these are, depending on what you want to do, you can do something like this. This is Photoshop that's super easy to transfer over to HTML and SASS. Basically some border radiuses and colors and some funky stuff. Really easy to do. These are taking those same colors and applying it to some UI pieces. Again, super simple. That wouldn't really take long to do, don't you think? It's not a full website. It's just little bits and pieces. So if you're pairing and working together, designers can pair with the developers, and it gives the designers a chance to tinker with the UI a bit. It gives the developers a chance to work on the structure. So if you're like me, you're probably looking and going, all right, this is how that HTML should look for that piece. This is how I can write it in CSS. Also really good for different interactions. So as a designer, I want to make sure I'm taking into account all the different states for errors for something that has focus. That's kind of what I would do. Again, as a developer, I'm going, all right, that's pretty easy to do. I have like one set of styles that I can apply to everything and then take care of some of the states. It's not too bad. Now, again, more stuff. Very simple. Overall, style guide pieces that take care of basic typography, baseline grids, tables, quotes, lists, all that good stuff. Fairly simple. Again, very easy to do in HTML. Now, you can take those and you can build this nice, robust style guide system. Now, this is Mozilla's. Theirs is actually pretty darn nice. Fairly in-depth. It's all HTML. I really like what they've done. They were talking about Git. Have you already seen it? Theirs is great as well. Carrying.com. Who we on here they are, I hope. But they have a nice HTML style guide as well. And there are a handful of style guide generators out there. They were talking about KSS, which is okay. It's not too bad. There's Collage, which is a little bit newer. It's all JavaScript based. And Darcy Clark has something called DSS, which is kind of a JavaScript spinoff of KSS, which is, works pretty well. And then there's StyleDoco, which is more like if you're in Node and using other things, and you can use StyleDoco. Now, the challenge, I think, with style guides is we do a lot of those manual because the systems don't quite do what we want yet. They don't quite have the finesse to make the design look really, really nice. So that's something that I'm like struggling with. So I know Chris has already put the shout out to kind of collab on that a bit. I'm game. If somebody wants to collab on building a nice style guide that's built on top of SASS and Compass, let's talk. It'll be a lot of fun. I want it. For purely selfish reasons, I want that sucker. So rapid prototypes is kind of like the last thing. So now with our clients, we don't do Photoshop comps and get them in a room and show off Photoshop comps. We do the lighter version. And when we're talking with the business and the stakeholders, we get them around a whiteboard, sketch things out, have them sketch, and just kind of see what they're thinking. And we'll take those and use our prototyping framework so we can make sure that everybody's collaborating and it's easier for us. So this is something that we're doing at a client that I can't mention, but they have this gargantuous enterprise application with like 4 dev teams working on it. It's like 40 people total, just developers. And I'm there as a UX consultant, but also doing a lot of, basically all their front end. And it's a .NET shop. Anybody working at a .NET shop? Yeah, that was like, yeah, I work at a .NET shop. It's hard, right? Do you use SASS where you work?
No, you ever learn about that.
Okay. It's really hard in .NET, only because the developers are like, new things. We can't have new things. They're using web forms, if you know what that is. For those that don't, it's like old .NET. So like pre-MVC stuff. Not the nicest. So we're trying to create this different front-end structure to move them along, make things better. But in the meantime, because that's like, I'll be there for like, 12 months, helping them fix their front end. It's good for the company. Mostly entertaining for me, because I get to tinker a lot. And they don't care. Let me do whatever I want. I've been in New York all week. They haven't complained. So what we've been doing is we have these sessions where we're talking with our various stakeholders. We take these sketches and convert those straight to HTML. These took like a half a day to just knock out. And then what we can do is we can get real live functional websites that match their base layout, and we can use usability studies. So for us, we want to make sure that what we're building is really useful, that getting from point A to point B to point C makes sense, that it makes their job easier. So this is kind of how it looks. Everything is sans color. Like, we don't want them focusing on any of the aesthetics, because then like, I don't like that color blue. We don't care. That's not the point of what we're trying to do. So we build all these things, and their stuff's very form heavy, which is always super fun to build. So it allows them to go in, and we're trying to teach them and build a system so they can actually tab through. Right now, the poor folks that are working in the system are like clicking everywhere, which is not very efficient or fun. So we're building things so that they can tab through and use their keyboard a bit more. And what we can do then is we're also building a style guide in tandem. Now, this is the unstyled version. So what we're doing is we basically have these series of scaffold files that take care of our structure, all the margins and paddings and specific layout pieces. So we can build these rapid prototypes and not have anything like overly pretty. So then the only thing that we really have to do is layer on a theme, and it makes it look like their Amwin's theme. I just said the name of the company. Forget that. I've been there too long. So yeah, so that's kind of the basic process with what we do with our clients. So we have all these things happening in tandem. Now this one's special because there's really no UI to do. They have an already established UI across their application. I would like to change it, but then again, I don't really want to. Because man, it's a lot of work. And it's out of scope for what we're doing. We want to make sure the interactions and the content make sense and that it matches their style. And so that's basically what we're doing. Now, so through the rest of the conference, I guess, you'll hear a lot more about style guides and style tiles and all that good stuff. You'll see all the nice code snippets and ways to do it. And if you have any questions, yeah, give me a yell. We can chat. If you know a place to find root beers, we can go find root beers and chat over root beers. Or eat cupcakes, and they like cupcakes and milk. So I'm totally down with that. They had 2 gallons of milk, and I already had like 3 or 4 glasses. So it's awesome. Any questions, I guess? While they come down? Any questions, comments, thoughts?
So introducing style tiles to designers who have worked in web design. My question is related to introducing designers to style tiles who, for the first time, I'll do front-end development and often work with clients who have established brand guidelines and those kinds of things. So they'll have their designers that they work with. I get lots of comments when introducing style tiles because some designers have they express difficulty in dealing with the design in the abstract rather than in the context of what the content is, which I get. But
right.
What would you suggest for helping those designers or helping me convince those designers to give it a shot?
So that's a big challenge. So in our group in Cincinnati, the majority of them are visual designers, and they've come from an agency background. Who works in an agency, out of curiosity? Who's a designer in an agency? Nobody? Yeah, I can be a little bit mean then. So in agencies, their business model is basically creating those iterations, doing those full-fledged Photoshop comps, because they take a lot of time, so that they charge on the iterations and how many changes you get, and they make a good chunk of change doing that. So with our folks that come from that background, where they're used to sitting in Photoshop and making these really fantastic-looking Photoshop comps, they're absolutely gorgeous, but the challenge that we have with those is that a lot of the work we do now are application-based, or we're doing a lot of responsive, and they don't quite translate. So the challenge, I think, in the way that we've been pitching it internally is that most of our clients have a limited budget, and they don't have all these different cycles where we can iterate and change and have all these meetings where they can go, I like that color and I don't like that color and I like that thing, so make me another Photoshop comp. We don't have time for that. They don't have the budget for it. And we want to deliver high quality work. So we can't with the budget and time constraints. So our pitch is that it makes us as a team more efficient and more effective as we're having conversations with the client. Really this is the way that I view wireframes and Photoshop comps. Wireframes or sketching, they're there to inform structure, where content should be placed. Photoshop comps, the reason that they create Photoshop comps is to really create the aesthetic. And you can do that without doing the entire page or 10 pages. So I actually do a lot more element collages than I do style tiles, because there's a little bit more detail. And I found that it's a little bit easier to pitch that to a client because they see something a little bit more than like an 8.5 by 11 page with a handful of swatches and some stuff. So that's the way that we're trying to push it. We still get a little bit of pushback, but...
You could also give them cupcakes and milk.
You could do cupcakes and milk. And I also tend to go the benevolent dictator route and go, this is what we're doing. And if you don't like it, then this is still what we're doing, and you have to learn to change a little bit. But if you're in the position to do that, yeah, it works great most of the time. If you're not in the position, and it's like your boss, then you just have to take them out to coffee or give them cupcakes, and just try and convince them nicely.
Is there much of a difference between style tiles and element collages? Are they more or less the same thing?
It's a similar idea. Style tiles are a little bit lighter. Element collages, so style tiles are focusing on just really basic typography and colors and textures and imagery. Element collages go a little bit further, and you're adding in icon sets and actual modules or pieces, not necessarily in context. So let me actually go back and we'll look at one. So this would be a portion of an element collage. These are actually larger, a portion of a larger element collage, basically. We're taking all these different elements and pieces and putting them together so we can go, all right, client, this is how forms look with the various states. This is how your click or hover pop-up tooltip boxes look with buttons. These are some colors, nods, and ends. And style tiles, they're just super simple. You're typically not designing modules or bits and pieces of the site. You're designing just these small aesthetical chunks.
Thanks. I have a question about style guides. I see the term living style guides a lot. Mm-hmm. And my understanding is that it's living only when you breathe life into it, like putting the code in and then pushing that. And I think maybe Chris touched on this, and maybe you supported that. Is there any way to have your code base, or just your regular code base, and have the style guide pull off of that and read from that to where it creates your style guide, as opposed to you having to take your code base and put it in the style guide?
Yeah, that's how KSS and most of them work. So in your Your CSS comments are your CSS is just like uber commented. There's just comments everywhere that define the HTML structure and like the title of it and the description.
But from what I understand is you have to copy from your CSS file or your HTML file into a separate file that then becomes a style guide. Is that right?
You actually don't know.
It's generated.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So that's how much work. And again, you don't have much control over like the output. Like that, they look mostly the same. You can tweak to a certain extent.
So if you won't control the output, you need to do it kind of manually.
Like in KSS, if you're in Ruby, you can stylize the HTML and kind of want to get spit out. But I want something a little bit easier that just kind of does it for me, so I don't have to really do much. Anything else? I'll go until they tell me to stop. Everybody good? All right. Thanks, everybody.